Hi everyone, my name is Jens Currie. I'm the Chief Scientist at Pacific Whale Foundation. Today I'm going to share with you some of the work we've been doing looking at whale behavior in the presence and absence of vessels in Maui, Hawaii. Before I get into that, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to my co-authors, Jessica McCorduck and Stephanie Stack, for all their help with this work and this presentation. A little background before I get into what we were doing. So just to paint the picture for you, I've pulled some data from 2016 looking at vessel traffic and humpback whale locations. And what we can see here from these two figures is that there's a high potential for whale vessel interactions in Hawaii. The figure on the left is vessel traffic. These are small vessels less than 65 feet in length. What we can see is there is a very dense concentration of vessel traffic in the nearshore waters of Maui and Lanai. If we look at humpback whale locations for the same time period in 2016, we can again see high densities of humpback whales in the nearshore waters of Maui and Lanai. And this results in, again, a high potential for whale vessel interactions in Hawaii. The Hawaii population itself has seen tremendous success back from early numbers in the 1970s to where we had just under 1,000 humpback whales here to the most recent estimates of approximately 10,000 whales. And so what we can see is a large increase in those humpback whale numbers, but at the same time, we also see an increase in tourism and visitors to Hawaii and specifically Maui. And so there's potential for increased interactions with humpback whales. To help mitigate the potential impacts, there are approach limits in place here in Hawaii. In Hawaii, humpback whale regulations result in no approaching within 100 yards of a humpback whale. That means you can't actively motor up or paddle towards a humpback whale beyond 100 yards. So you can paddle up to 100 yards, but you can't get any closer than that. In addition to that approach limit, there's also no thrill craft operation and parasail vessel operations off South and West Maui during whale season, which typically begins December 15th each year. And so to answer this question of how are whales acting around vessels, we conducted theodolite research from 2016 to 2018, so 3 years of data collection. And we did this to determine whether interactions with vessels affect whale behavior using a land-based platform. So 2 sites located on Maui. The first site is known as Papawai Point, and the second site is known as Pu'u'olai. And if you look at the pictures on the right, you're going to see that these are elevated viewing platforms or areas, which give you a good vantage point out over the water to look at whales from land to ensure that the impacts of a research vessel are not diluting the results or impacting the results and behaviors that you're seeing. While we were up on the hill there, we were collecting time-specific data to look at changes in behavior over time. To do this, pods of humpback whales were tracked for a minimum of 15 minutes and a maximum of 2 hours. And we looked at the behavior of those humpback whales before a vessel was present, while or during a vessel was present, and then after a vessel approached. So after the vessel had left. And we recorded data on location of pods. So if we look at the image on the right here, this is actually what it looks like for us to track those whales from an instrument called a theodolite, which allows us to determine the exact position of those humpback whales. So we put those crosshairs on the humpback whale, and then we take a fix or a whale fix, and we're actually able to get the very precise GPS position, latitude and longitude of that humpback whale. In addition to tracking those pods, we also count the number of blows and the number of dives. We look at the number of vessels that are present and how many. And then we also, the same way we collect a fix on the humpback whales, we're collecting fixes of those vessels, determining the exact position of those vessels, and then determining the distance between the vessel and the pod. We're also collecting pod-specific and vessel-specific data. And so on the pod level, we're looking at the composition of the pod as well as the group size, with the understanding that different behaviors are observed with different compositions and group sizes. And we also want to look at the type of vessel. Is it a tourism vessel? Is it a recreational vessel? Is it a motorized vessel? Is it a non-motorized vessel? Each of these may have in turn different impacts to humpback whales, so we want to make sure we're able to account for that in our analysis, and so we collect it at the data collection stage. And defining encounter types, so what are we looking at? We're looking for behavior changes that occur before, during, and after a vessel approaches. And this can then be viewed as in terms of the control behaviors or the natural behaviors of the humpback whale, which we recorded before a vessel was present. We can look at the impact behaviors while a vessel was present. So this is when a vessel was within 500 yards of those humpback whales. We consider that impact. And then we also want to look at if there's a potential residual effect on the humpback whale's behavior by looking at the humpback whale's behavior after a vessel has left. We can also simplify that and just look at whale behaviors before a vessel was present and then while a vessel was present, and compare those two behavior types and see if they're significantly different. And again, behaviors during encounters were when vessels were within 500 yards or less of those humpback whales. The particular behaviors we were looking in, so we're looking at how does vessel impact swim speed, dive time, respiration rate, and directness index. And for swim speed, it's quite simply the distance that the animal moved per unit time. So swim speed in kilometers per hour. The dive time is the duration of time between dives. So we took a waypoint or marked the time when the pod dove, and then we marked the time again when the pod came back to the surface. While they were at the surface, we also recorded respiration rate, which is the number of blows per minute. And then lastly, we looked at how straight are the humpback whales traveling. And so to do this, we calculated a directness index where a value of 0 indicates a circular path and a value of 100 indicates a straight line path. So we spent 3 years or 73 days collecting data on humpback whales from 2016 to 2018. And we recorded data on 316 pods, which were made up of 943 whales. And we observed 472 vessel approaches and encounters. So we have a really robust data set here to determine if vessels are having a potential impact on humpback whale behavior. And so what did we find? I'm going to go through each of those behaviors that we looked at now one by one and look at some of the significant results that we found. Excuse me. To do our analysis, we used what are called general additive models. And with any model, we're basically trying to predict how variables will impact a response variable. So in each of these cases, the response variable is swim speed, and we're looking at what factors explain the observed swim speed that we're measuring. In this case, for swim speed, we found that pod composition and the distance between a vessel and a pod had significant impacts on the observed swim speed. More specifically, we noticed that fastest swim speeds occurred when a vessel was 90 to 150 meters from the pod, and we also observed that pods swam slower when they had calves. So this is not surprising that mother calf pods and mother calf escort pods were swimming at slower speeds as they have those younger calves and might not move as quickly. To illustrate this, we have two graphs on the right. If we look at the first graph and we look at the dashed vertical lines, that is the 90 to 150 meter mark distance between the vessel and the humpback whale. And what we can see is we have a significant increase in swim speed from that 90 to about 125 meter mark. After that, it slows down again, but you do have that significant increase once vessels are approaching that 90 meter mark, or which is also the 100-yard approach limit. If we look at respiration rate, we found that the encounter type, before, during, and after, the pod composition, and again, the distance between the vessel and the pod significantly impacted the respiration rates. And so looking at these results, we found that the number of blows per minute changed with distance to vessel, Again, at that 90 to 180-meter distance, we had a sharp increase in the number of blows per minute. And we also observed a decrease in blows per minute after an encounter with a vessel. So if we look at the respiration rates before and during an encounter, we can see that they're significantly lower after a vessel has left the area. Looking at travel direction, here we found again encounter type, and again that distance between the vessel and the pod to significantly impact the travel direction or the straight line um, movement of those humpback whales. And we found that they traveled in the most straight line when a vessel was 90 to 150 meters from the pod, and we also observed that during and after an encounter, they had the straightest line of travel when you compare that to how they're traveling before a vessel is present. Finally, the last behavior we looked at was dive time. Here we found encounter type and pod composition to significantly impact dive time. We found that the shortest dive times occurred for mother calf escort pairs. Again, not surprising when you have those smaller calves that they're going to have shorter down times and shorter dive times. But we also observed that dive times were shorter during and after a vessel was present when you compare that to before a vessel was present. So to take those modeling results and put them into an animation, this is sort of what we're seeing. We have on the bottom here a vessel and a humpback whale, and currently they're at around 350 meters in distance from each other. As they begin to close that distance, we begin to see a potential impact in whale behavior. What we're seeing at that early stages there, at that initial approach, when we're just beyond 200 meters, is increase in dive time, a decrease in your swim speed, a decrease in the respiration rate, and a more straighter line of travel. Once the whale and vessels decrease the distance even further, so now we're at that 100-yard approach distance, we see dive time significantly decrease further, swim speed significantly increase, respiration rate significantly increase, and the direction of travel turn to a mostly straight line direction of travel. And then if we go beyond the 100 yards, this is usually when vessels have their engines shut off. They're just sitting there stationary. We have behaviors that are indicative of what we call a mugging here in Hawaii, where the whale approaches the vessel and then closely circles around the vessel and stays with the vessel while the vessel and the passengers enjoy this really unique experience with humpback whales. So we have very low dive times, very low swim speed, very low respiration rates, and very much a circular direction of travel. So the biological importance of this, there's certainly implications for the species, since it does appear that whales display a horizontal avoidance strategy when their vessels are approaching 100 yards to the humpback whales. And this is certainly something that's been reported before in the literature and is not that surprising with when you're looking at humpback whale and vessel implications. So what does this mean? What can we recommend? Well, there's certainly additional guidelines besides the approach distance that we could potentially recommend that vessel operators do. I'm excited to say that currently a subset of vessels follow the Be Whale Aware guidelines, and we know which vessels they are. And they have significantly more guidelines than an approach limit. They have no watching zones ahead and behind the humpback whales, and they have a lot of restrictions around vessel speeds, so they're not allowed to travel faster than 15 knots from November to December and April to May, and then only 12.5 knots or less during peak whale season from January to March. In addition, when they're within 440 yards of a whale, they cannot travel faster than 6 knots. Therefore, you're really minimizing the potential noise implications of a vessel coming close to those humpback whales. So they still approach within or up to 100 yards, but they do so at a very slow speed, and they do so strategically from the side and not at the front or at the rear of the pod or individual animal. They also limit their viewing times to 30 minutes when there's a calf present, and there's no more than 3 vessels at any pod at one time. And so, since we know which vessels are following these Be Whale Aware guidelines, we can actually look at, are these subset of vessels still having an impact on humpback whales? And I'm excited to say that actually following the Be Whale Aware guidelines minimizes and reduces the behavior change I just presented in the previous slides, and really drives home the message that we potentially do need to consider additional guidelines for humpback whales in Hawaii to truly minimize the impact. And to sort of illustrate this now, I've brought up the 4 behaviors we looked at again. And what we're going to look at here is a comparison of whale behaviors when there's a vessel present, uh, when there's a Be Whale Aware vessel present, and then when there's only non-Be Whale Aware vessels present, and compare that to when the whale's behavior when there's no vessels present. And so a no vessel present behavior is indicated here in blue or highlighted in the blue section right here. And then the Be Whale Aware only vessels are the behaviors we observe here in the red. So if we start just with dive time, we look at the Be Whale Aware only vessels, and here this dark line indicates the mean level of dive time, and we want to compare where this line falls on the y-axis with humpback whale behaviors when there's no vessel presence. And ideally, we want these to be the same to indicate no impact. And what we actually see here is that they're very similar and they're not significantly different. But if we look at non-Be Whale Aware vessels, these are vessels that don't follow any additional guidelines, we can see that that behavior of decreased dive times is specific to these vessels not following Be Whale Aware guidelines. We see similar trends throughout two more of these behaviors. If we move on to respiration rate or blows per minute, again, we're comparing the behaviors observed when a Be Whale Aware vessel was present to the behaviors when no vessel was present. And again, we can see no significant difference. But here we do see when there's a mix of Be Whale Aware vessels and non-Be Whale Aware vessels that the blows or respiration rates are decreasing. If we move on to travel direction, we see a similar trend where the behaviors when a Be Whale Aware vessel is present are very similar to the behaviors when no vessel is present, and indeed they are not significantly different. But we can see again in travel direction, we have that straighter line of travel when there's a mix of Be Whale Aware and non-Be Whale Aware vessels, as well as when there's only non-Be Whale Aware vessels present. And so this is a trend that also holds for speed. And ultimately, what this is showing is that if you want the whales to act the same as when there's no vessel present, you really need to have additional guidelines. And it would seem from these analyses that the Be Whale Aware guidelines are sufficient to reduce any behavior changes that might result from having a vessel present. And we can see that because we look at the behaviors before a vessel is present and look at the behaviors when a Be Whale Aware vessel is present, and we can see that they're actually the same, meaning there's no significant change. But if we look at a whale's behavior when there's no vessel present and non-Be Whale Aware vessels, we do see that change in behavior, and therefore, again, highlighting the need for additional guidelines for vessels to follow while they're watching humpback whales in Hawaii. And so there is a potential energetic cost of these short-term responses that we're seeing. It's difficult to quantify these at the population level, but they are thought to be minimal, and we are working to understand the energetics associated with increased exposure to whale watching. So we'll hopefully have more to come on that in the future. But again, as I've said, there's further guidance on methods of approach and how and where to maintain 100 yards, as is given in the Be Whale Aware program, will certainly help reduce any immediate impacts that we're observing as a result of vessels watching whales here in Maui. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening. If you guys do have any questions, please post them in the comments of this video. I'll do my best to monitor and answer, or you can email me directly at jenscurrie@pacificwhale.org. I do want to acknowledge Pac Whale Eco Adventures for supporting this research, members of Pacific Whale Foundation for funding this research, and of course, Pacific Whale Foundation staff, interns, and volunteers who have helped out tremendously process this data, collect this data, and help us get to the stage where we are today. If you want to continue to support Pacific Whale Foundation and projects like this, please do make a donation. It's very much appreciated, and it goes a long way to help us protect these whales and dolphin species here in Maui and abroad. Thank you.